Hello and welcome everyone to the Author Reading Room. It is March 23rd, 2022, and we are having a cozy mystery month. So we've got 4 authors with us today, 2 from Australia who are actually coming to us from tomorrow if you are in the US right now, or in Europe, it's still tomorrow in Australia. So thank you so much for getting up early and sharing your books with us. And I've already explained to everybody how to use the reactions button and the raised hands button in the chat. So I am going to just go ahead and introduce you to our first author. All right, our first author is Margaret Lashley. Margaret, let me just put you on spotlight view so everybody can see who you are. Hello. All right, Margaret is a lifelong lover of laughter, an aficionado of the absurd. She brings her sideways look at the world to life in the pages of her books. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you, Kitty.
So tell us what you're going to read for us today.
Well, I'm going to read the beginning of Glad One, which is actually the first book that I published, and it's been actually my bestseller. It's 5 years old and still rocking.
Nice.
So anyway.
Excellent.
Whenever
all right.
you're ready. And it's called Glad One. Crazy is a relative term. And I write midlife women who are kind of down and out, but still spunky, kind of a hot mess underdog. So, and a lot of people think that is, kind of a reflection on me too, but hey, what can I say? So, okay, well, here goes. Oops, somebody started sharing the screen.
Oh,
okay.
1 second.
Hello. What's happening?
I might be able to undo that. There we go.
Okay. All right. Here we go. All right. Okay. Please don't adjust your sets. Technical difficulty. Okay. So chapter 1. Some people lead lives under a dark cloud, others under a lucky star. As far as I could tell, my life was under the control of a sadist, brandishing a cattle prod and a whoopee cushion. The plane from Frankfurt, Germany wobbled erratically as it hit heavy turbulence just north of Orlando. My drooping head lurched forward, and I startled myself awake with a piggish snort. I shot an apologetic look at the man wedged in the seat next to me. Sorry, I must have dozed off for a second. Yeah, right, lady. That snore of yours could put a jackhammer to shame. I shrunk back in my seat and groaned. My feet hadn't even touched the ground back in the US, and already I had my first rude awakening. What else should I have expected? My whole life to date had been akin to one long, never-ending rude awakening. But that was all about to change. After all, it was New Year's Eve. I glanced around at the other bleary-eyed passengers around me. They probably had their minds on fresh beginnings too. As for me, I had no choice. The past I just fled was still too raw and painful to touch. I studied the pale strip of flesh encircling my now naked ring finger. The ghostly reminder of yet another failed attempt at love sent a hot jolt of desperation racing through my gut. I needed a good cry, but this was not the time or place for it. So to distract myself, I decided to count my blessings. 1 decimated pocketbook, 2 cottage cheese thighs, 3 maladjusted ex-husbands. Ah, crap. Whoever was running the show up there had a wicked sense of humor, and I was getting darn tired of being the punchline. I scrounged around for my powder compact and opened it, intent on repairing my makeup after the 9-hour flight. One glance in the mirror at my worn-out face made me snap it shut. Why bother? In 45 years, I'd accumulated a good portion of wrinkles, a fair amount of belly fat, and apparently precious little wisdom. These questionable assets, along with $5,726 and a suitcase full of inappropriate clothes, were all I had left to launch my latest life makeover. I slumped back into my seat. I was bone-dragging tired. Even so, a grin snuck across my lips like a stolen kiss from a stranger. I was not defeated. Not yet, anyway. The way I saw it, I still had two viable options. One, I could finally learn to laugh at myself, or two, I could, drink myself into oblivion. I fished around the bottom of my purse for a coin to determine my fate. I flipped a tarnished nickel into the air and did a triple gainer, plunged into my coffee cup, and splashed a nasty brown stain onto the crotch of my white stretch pants. Awesome. Let the festivities begin. My last life makeover had been a little over 7 years ago and had turned out to be a spectacular downward spiral akin to diving off a cliff with a bowling ball in my pants. Drowning in dullness and fueled by movie-inspired stupidity, I ditched a tiresome marriage, a lucrative writing career, sold all my belongings, and took off for Europe. In Italy, I met a German and fell in love with the idea of life with a stranger in a strange land. And things had been great for a while. But then the shiny wore off and the cracks showed up, like they always did. On my arrival back to St. Petersburg, Florida, I quickly discovered that 7 was not a lucky number. In fact, 7 years abroad had been exactly long enough for my entire credit history to be erased. Just like most of my money, I'd gotten off the plane in Tampa with no driver's license, no place to live, no credit card, no phone, no job, and worst of all, no friends. Incredibly, I'd somehow managed to become a foreigner in my own homeland. As a lifelong lover of irony, I had to shake my head and wonder at my own warped ingenuity. How many other people on the planet could claim such a monumental screw? Over the next few weeks, my solo climb back aboard the American Dream had required counting pennies and swallowing more than just pride. And after that, I had to scrounge around for a tire jack and lower my expectations to half a notch above gutter level. That's how I ended up in a no credit check hovel of an apartment, living a no foreseeable future scrabble of a life. Yay! A few months into what I sarcastically dubbed my adjustment period, I'd been contemplating a Smith & Wesson retirement plan when something unforeseeable happened. I met an old woman named Glad. I'd been in desperate need of a life coach, and Glad had fit the bill perfectly. In fact, the fact that she was a crazy homeless woman had been the icing on the cake. I could afford her fees. St. Petersburg only had 2 seasons, summer and not summer yet. It was not summer yet, but just barely. I first met Glad in the first half of May. I remember because I was trying to make the most of the end of days. That's what I called the first 2 weeks of May, because anybody with any sense, translation, not a tourist or a transplant, didn't venture out in the Florida sun between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. from the middle of May to the end of October. Not if they could help it, that is. And with no job at the time, I could help it. As usual, I was determined to get to Sunset Beach early that Sunday, not just to beat the heat, but to beat the $5 parking fee as well. If I got there before the lot attendant, I could sneak into the lot at Caddy's, my favorite beach bar. Sunset Beach was attractive to me for 3 reasons. 1, it was gorgeous, with sugar white sand and water the color of a fresh robin's egg. 2, the tourists hadn't discovered it yet. And 3, it was the only local strip of beach that allowed open containers. In other words, bring your own alcohol. Caddy's bar sat right on the gorgeous Sunset Beach, sandwiched between a patch of virgin sand dunes and a recently erected 3-story McMansion, the color of pumpkin puke. It was Mother's Day, and not being a mother myself or having one I was keen to celebrate, I I planned to let the day go by as unnoticed as possible. As I reached the white picket fence leading out to the beach, I spied an old woman lying on a lounger a good 50 feet from the shoreline. I'd seen her there countless times over the past few months. She was a wiry, leather-skinned old bat who, had I met on the street, I'd probably have labeled a bag lady. But there at the beach, she kind of fit right in. Who knows, maybe stripping down to a bathing suit somehow leveled the playing field. The old woman always set up camp near the same wispy clump of sea oats. So it had been easy to avoid her so far. But that Sunday, however, my luck finally ran out. The wind blew sand in my eye, and as I fumbled along trying to get it out, I wandered blindly within earshot of her. "Hey, nice toe rings," she croaked in a scarred, toady voice that perfectly matched her appearance. Sprawled out on a pink plastic beach lounger, she reminded me of one of those dried up frogs you can still find now and then in politically incorrect souvenir shops. I was running on just one cup of coffee that morning, so it took a moment to realize she was talking to me. I turned, thanks, I said, and took a step toward the water, but the old woman wasn't having it. "Want a beer?" she asked. She grinned at me from under a pink Gilligan hat. Her oversized dentures looked clownish, wedged between two wide smears of bright red lipstick. "It's Sunday, you know. They ain't serving booze till 11 today." Her salty, sweet Southern accent had a familiar ring. I'd spent 3 decades trying to rid myself of one just like it. She tilted her head and motioned toward a small cooler nestled in the sand beside her. I shook my head. "No, thanks, I'm good." I forced a smile and gave her a quick once over. The old lady was one shade up from mahogany and as wrinkled as a linen pantsuit after a high stakes game of Twister. Her arms and legs looked like 4 Slim Jims sticking out of a neon bathing suit. "Okie dokie then, have it your way," Slim Jim said. She watched me carefully from behind black bug-eyed sunglasses. Her gaze never shifted as she reached instinctively into the cooler, pulled out a can, then cracked the tab on a family-sized Foster's beer. I seized the opportunity and turned to take another step toward the water. That's when I thought I heard her say, "Screw you, kiddo." I whirled around to face her. "What?" "Screw you, kiddo," she repeated, flashing her denture cream smile. She hoisted up the pint-sized beer between her bony fingers, causing half a pound of costume jewelry to cascade toward her elbows and twinkle in the glaring sunlight. Uncertain if the woman was a witch or a comedian, I tilted my head and cautiously mirrored her ear-to-ear grin. "That's what I thought you said," I replied. "Well, screw you too." "Love it," she shot back. "Where are you from?"
Beginning of a great friendship.
Yes, most definitely.
I can see why it's still
That's
a
really
popular
funny.
book. Yeah.
That's really funny, Margaret. Well
Oh,
done.
thanks.
I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Thank you. It's American humor, so I hope it translates.
You're talking to Australians. We grew up on American humor.
Okay. Actually, US is my biggest market, followed by Canada and then Australia.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah. So thank you. Oi, oi.
Oh.
Well done.
I don't even know if that's right, but I give it a shot.
One more oi. One more oi. Oi,
Oh,
oi,
oi,
oi.
oi, oi. There we go.
Got it.
Oh, thanks, Margaret. Listen, as everybody finishes doing
Oh, yeah.
the readings, people will put in the links to their website or the buy links for their books so that you can check them out. So while Margaret is doing that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who does in fact happen to be the Australian Kaz Delaney. So Kaz, why don't we give you a little spotlight shout out here so everybody can see you. There we go.
Change glasses so I can read.
Right? Oh my
but
gosh,
thank
I
you
have so
for
many pairs
that.
of glasses. Awesome. Let me give you a little direction, a little introduction, Kaz.
Thank you.
Kaz Delaney is an award-winning author of 76 books. She's
Oh my
written
God.
across the board, yeah, for children, young adults, and adults. After her agent suggested she move her crime books into the adult market, she is happily writing for Tool Publishing in what is probably her favorite genre, cozy mysteries. Her latest book, A Bittersweet Murder, was just released yesterday. Yay! Welcome, Kaz.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here, even though I have to say to all the overseas people who are here, for Philippa and I, it's just after 7 a.m. So, so we've done, so if my voice is a little bit croaky, forgive me. I've been trying to lubricate it all morning, but probably still is morning voice. The other thing I have to say is, thanks to COVID and slow postage, I actually don't have my hard copies yet. So I'm actually showing you a copy of a notebook that I had made from the covers, but I am actually not reading from that book. So forgive me.
Oh, fun.
So here we go. It was a funeral for two. One body, one mourner. Some things are made for two. They're comfortable, even desirable. Things like tea for two, a tango, a tandem, bicycle ride, a cuddle at a drive-in movie. Funerals aren't one of those things. Funerals are a celebration of life, a time for mutual comfort and support, a time for shared memories, generally. The funeral of Miss Alice Alkenschloss was obviously the exception to that rule. And let me say, being the only graveside mourner leaves a chill inside that would take a whole lot more than a warm spring Texas morning to alleviate, especially if that wasn't what you were expecting. I knew because that's what I felt as I stood there alone on that Friday morning, bidding my last goodbye to Miss Alice. Shock and pain for her had made my prayers for her safe passing more fervent. Well, at least when I wasn't thinking dark thoughts about the people of her hometown, the ones who'd all found something more important to do that day, that morning, than giving an elderly lady a respectful send-off. It was true that Miss Alice hadn't been the most pleasant woman I'd ever met, nor the easiest client I'd ever cared for. But did that warrant their behaviour? I felt I'd gotten to know her in the course of my work as a daily daily companion. And yes, she was crotchety, but she was 85 years old and I'd actually become quite fond of her. As the weeks had turned into months, that rapier tongue had lost some of its edge. And I put her initial mood down to the fact that she just had enough of a life that hadn't been as kind as it could have been. And in my opinion, that was a poor reason to ignore an old lady on her final day on earth. She was the last of two family lines and had been for some time. So I hadn't expected any family to come to her funeral, but I'd hoped that some of the townspeople would see it in their hearts to send her off, but they hadn't. And so I'd stood alone next to Reverend Petrie while the gravediggers lowered her coffin into the family plot under the branches of a sprawling oak. I shivered as the sod hit the hardwood coffin, the sound echoing around the dark cavity that was as cold and empty as the chairs circling the grave. The morning had challenged every assumption and belief I'd held about small town life. Even though I was a relative newcomer to Texas, having moved from Oklahoma, I thought I had a good idea of what it would be like to live in a small community like Airlie Falls. Blame it on all those cozy mysteries I'd devoured. But when they described neighbours who cared for each other in a place where everybody helped everybody else, I'd fallen for it. Sure, some of them murdered each other, but for the most part, they knew you knew them, and community trust meant that no one locked their doors, which, come to think of it, was probably why they were easy to murder. They never locked their doors. What's more, I craved this small town life, not the murdering part, of course, but that sense of inclusion, of being an integral part of something. And I'd read enough cozy mystery books to consider that I knew these places as well as the people who had lived in these magical towns. Well, so much for believing what you read in books, because from what I could see, all those authors had got it wrong. Early Falls in north central Texas was nothing like that. Maybe the good pastor had guessed it would be like this. Miss Alice had surprisingly and shockingly in one sense left instructions that I should organise her funeral, or more to the point, simply see to it that her wishes were carried out. She'd chosen the readings, prayers and hymns. She'd not mentioned anything about serving refreshments, and as a love of baking had been one of the things we'd bonded over, I'd offered some options to the pastor. In response, he'd looked at me in an odd way and then quickly told me not to worry, that his wife, Miss Petrie, would arrange something at the church hall. Yet that morning when I'd arrived at the manse a few minutes early with 2 sour cream and peach cakes and a plate of candy bar cookies, Pippa Petrie had been really awkward about it. And as far as I could see as I peeked over her shoulder, no other preparations had been made. That had surprised me. The Petries had seemed like good community people, just as I would have expected from the spiritual leaders of a small rural town. But even they didn't seem to care about Miss Alice's final farewell. From what I could see, it was obvious some kind of celebration was taking place, but that didn't include any platters of food or preparations for a wake. Of course, the puzzle was solved 40 minutes later when I instructed the embarrassed minister to begin the service for 2, the deceased and her 1 mourner. And I imagine a whole flurry of family ghosts who held to family secrets because, and maybe I had just read too many books, it was starting to appear to me that surely there was more to this situation than an uncaring community. Afterwards, I thanked the pastor for the service, an impersonal mash of generic, haltingly delivered words and taped hymns. And I was sincere. I could hardly blame him for not knowing her when I didn't really know her that well myself, nor the facts behind the day's strange outcome. But it still rankled that someone who'd lived such a long life, someone who'd surely left a substantial footprint on this world, should slip out so unnoticed. There must have been family stories, adventures she's had, the role she'd played in the community where she lived a whole life, her interactions in that community before she became too old and unwell to take a further role. But there'd been none of that, no one to speak for her or to tell those stories. And as I walked away, I knew no more about Miss Alice Alkenschloss than I'd known 4.5 months ago when I was hired to be her daytime companion. The cemetery was quiet as I headed back out to my car, save for the peaceful drone of local bees ransacking a group of huckleberry bushes and the distant chug of a tractor going about its work. It might be early in the season, but spring had well and truly rolled into town. Spring blossoms had arrived in an explosion of colour and the air was fragrant and warm against my face and arms. Had I not been swamped in misery and confusion, I would have found such peace in this setting. There was another thing that made me sad. This pretty little town was a place I could have happily called home. It had everything I'd ever dreamed of. Quaint little stores, a town green, clean air and sunshine, room to grow your own produce, a place where crafts and homemade were appreciated, and to prove it, there was a twice monthly thriving craft and farmers market. Of course, I'd assumed this all came wrapped up in the hometown warmth of a Norman Rockwell painting, but now I knew how wrong I was. I was almost to my destination when another vehicle crunched onto the gravel driveway and pulled up right beside mine in an otherwise empty parking lot. An older man, maybe in his mid-70s, balding and a bit paunchy, stepped out and looked over toward me. He was neatly dressed in a pale suit, white shirt and bolo tie held by a huge silver and turquoise slide. I paused. Had he come to say goodbye to Miss Alice? My heart lifted a little. And as he pulled on a white Stetson and took determined strides to reach me, his right hand reached me first. The left tipped the hat that he just donned before dropping it back into position. Miss Rosie Hart. I took his hand and noted it didn't have the work-roughened feel of a farmer's, despite his well-worn boots. Yes, that's right. Have you come to pay your respects to Miss Alice? I'm afraid the funeral's over, but her resting place is just over near that old oak tree. Well, he said, pushing his hat further back on his forehead, that's partly why I'm here. I'd intended to get here earlier, but I had a darned flat tire and it cost me time. I expect it all went to plan. Old Alice seemed to have it all laid out as she all wanted it to be. His voice carried the rough cigar rumble, and I found it oddly comforting in a grandfatherly way. Nodding, I said, yes, it did. And you are, are you a relative? No, wait, I'm sorry. Miss Alice told me she didn't have any relatives, so you must be a friend? Excuse my manners, young lady. My name is Hank Henderson, and I can't rightly say I was Miss Alice's friend, but I'm certainly a lawyer. My heart sank. Oh. His brown morphed into a mock frown. You look disappointed. We lawyers aren't all that bad, you know. There was a twinkle in his eye, and I could see kindness there that sat well with the rest of the image. I sighed. I'm sorry. I guess I was just hoping that some friends might have dropped by. For a moment, he said nothing, just stared at me. Finally, he said, I can see you didn't know all of Alice's instructions for today. It was in the local paper, and of course the town gossip machine spread it to all corners of Early Falls, but I guess that news wouldn't have gotten to you. You see, he said, choosing his words carefully, Alice left a note with me to be delivered to the town paper to be published when her time came. It was a notification of her death with the categorical instructions that no one from the town or surrounds was welcome at her funeral. He cleared his throat. I shouldn't be admitting this, but I edited it, I might. I shouldn't. She did go on to express her explicit and unsavoury feelings about several of the townspeople and her general dislike of all of them. I removed that part. It didn't seem to serve any good purpose and hurt people unnecessarily. They're good people. They tried, but she shunned them at every turn. Thank you. I think that's my 10 minutes.
Wow.
A lot about the town, and I realised that when I was reading it last night. And I thought, there's a lot about the town in the beginning of this. But as I wrote this, Early Falls was always going to be another character in the town. And it's actually one of the things I think that holds, well, it does hold the whole community together. It's silly to say that it doesn't, but it's that town, I think, and the community that pulls the readers in. And I think that's what the reviews have been saying. So many people have said to me they'd love to live in this town. Of course, everything, a bit like you, Margaret, our characters never have it easy. This lovely Rosie's about to find out that she's had a very rough life to this point, but she's about to find out that every dream she's ever had has come true. She inherits everything from Miss Alice, who had no one else to leave it to. The substantial bank balance, the farmhouse, the property, everything comes to her. And she can't believe it. And within half an hour, it's taken away from her again. So she has about a half an hour to go, I can't believe this. And then we find out that some later results have come through when Miss Alice was murdered, and because no one else had been near her for months and Rosie inherited, then Rosie must have done it.
Oh no.
So it goes on from there. Yeah, so in about another 3 pages, poor old Rosie has to find out that she's fighting for her life now. So yeah, but it doesn't sound funny at all. Margaret is hilarious from the moment she gets into the book, and I just commend you for that because it's wonderful. But there are lots of funny moments through the book. So, but not in the beginning, obviously, I've realised.
I write really unconventional things. Almost no one ever gets murdered in any of my books. And it's just it's more of a fun, it's just more of a humor book with a mystery thread in it, So
and I think that's really interesting. I do murder people. As a matter of fact, I was putting something on Facebook.
I do too, a bunch in a while, but not it's not a given.
And a young friend of mine put on the bottom of my thing, so Kaz, how many murders are you up to now? I've lost count. And I counted and I said, I don't know, what's the going rank for a serial killer these days? I don't know. Is there a rank before you can be called serial? I think I'm up to about 13, and before the end of the year I think it jumps to about 17. But hey, as I say, I never murder people we like, right? Never murder people you like.
Yeah.
Nice. Wonderful. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to introduce the next author, but be sure to put the link to your website and maybe an Amazon link or whatever you got to your book. And then people can be clicking on that. I'm going to remove your spotlight. And our next guest is Lynn. So Lynn, when you are able to turn your camera back on, I will put you in the spotlight. Lynn told us before we started that she's got some dogs, and one of them is the star of one of her mysteries, the current one, I think the one that we're going to read about today. And so I was like, oh, she might have had to turn her camera off to take care of, a naughty puppy. I don't know.
No, it's not even my dog's fault. Where other people drink coffee in the morning, I always drink a giant Pepsi. So I had to visit the restroom.
Right.
Sorry about that.
Lynn, can I just show you my Diet Coke? I'll just show you my Diet Coke,
Yes.
Lynn. So there you go.
Wonderful. Well, so Lynn Bohart holds a master's degree in theater and teaches writing through Green River College. Steeped in the 3-act play structure, she has self-published 9 popular paranormal mystery novels and 2 short story books on Amazon. The Key to Murder is the 5th book in her popular Old Maids of Mercer Island series. She is also founder of Lil Dog Communications, a freelance writing and consulting company. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you, Kitty. Actually, I met Kitty through one of my clients for my freelance writing company. So, it's a small world.
So,
So I have a detective series, a Detective Giorgio Salvatore series. There's 3 books in that, the standalone mystery novel, and then 5 books in the Old Maids of Mercer Island. They're all paranormal, so they all involve ghosts. In this series, they're humorous and helpful. Well, they're all helpful ghosts. None of them are scary, but these are humorous ghosts. And I often get readers who wait for the ghosts to show up and play a role. So you won't, I'm just going to read the first chapter of, this is, Key to Murder is up for pre-order right now. It'll launch on April 1st. So I don't have the paperback book in my hand yet, but that's the cover of it behind me. And so there's no ghosts in the first chapter, but you'll get a sense of what this murder is. It has to do with Jack the Ripper, believe it or not, which has always been a fascination of mine. So this is the first chapter from The Key to Murder. My uncle was dead before he hit the floor, not in the literal sense. He would die a minute or so later, but I didn't know that at the time. Hold on, my computer's talking to me. It was just after 10 a.m. on a dry and sunny August morning. The air was fresh with a scent of pine carried along by a slight breeze off Lake Washington. Several of the guests at the St. Clarion had left for the day. The rest were either in their rooms or out on the back deck, watching the sailboat skim across the lake. It was the kind of idyllic day we savor in the Northwest because we know it won't last long. Rain seems always in the forecast. I was in the main kitchen helping my business partner, April, finish up the breakfast dishes when she turned to me and said, "Can you get the door?" "Huh?" I replied. The doorbell rang a second later and I gave her a mischievous smile. "Damn, I wish I could do that," I said. April had what they call a sixth sense. She often heard the phone or the doorbell before they'd even rung. I'd always wondered if her ability came from her Creole background in New Orleans. Not that she'd ever mentioned them sticking pins into dolls or anything, but occasionally she saw visions that had helped us in our murder investigations. I hurried to the front door with my 2 miniature dachshunds, Mickey and Minnie, running ahead of me, barking. After all, dachshunds bark at anything, especially a bell. As I swung the door open, expecting to find a stranger, I found Carter Davis instead, wearing a buttoned-up shirt under an old army green sweater, hardly necessary on a warm August day. His shoulders were turned, looking behind him as if waiting for someone. Then he snapped his head toward me as a green Camaro revved its motor and sped up the street. "Julia," he said, "someone's following." A quick inhale cut off the end of his sentence as he lurched across the threshold into the entryway, perspiration covering his forehead. He grabbed me around the waist, nearly pulling me off my feet. "Uncle Carter," I managed to say, working to extricate myself. I'd known Carter since I was a girl, but we'd never been close enough to, well, fondle each other. "What in the world are you doing?" He ran his hands down my side as he slid to the floor, giving Minnie, my little red doxy, the opportunity to move in and begin licking his face. "Minnie, stop that," I scolded her, yanking her back. I shooed her away and stepped out of Carter's reach to stare down at one of my family's oldest and dearest friends. His eyes had closed and he wheezed with each labored breath. I leaned over and shook his shoulder, calling his name. He didn't respond. Perhaps he'd just fallen asleep. Carter was a bit of an eccentric, so while unlikely, maybe he'd just dozed off. Carter, I said, shaking him again. Once more, no response. Was he unconscious? I peered closely at his wizened face. His skin had a mottled reddish tint to it, and there was something white caught in the beard stubble around his mouth. I was about to call for April when his gray eyes popped open and he grabbed my wrist and yanked me down to his level, scaring the bejesus out of me. They killed me, Julia, he said through a slur of spittle. Tell Ben to look for the... His muscles twitched and his last word got caught in a gag or a gurgle. I wasn't sure which. He dropped back to the floor and went still, leaving the nasty smell of vomit behind, his gray eyes staring straight ahead. Carter? I yelled. Carter? I shook him again and slapped his face, but this time my efforts didn't rouse a response. I put 2 fingers to his neck. I realized he had no pulse. A wave of shock washed over me. It was gone. Someone I'd known since childhood was gone. I took a steadying breath as tears flooded my eyes, and I hiccuped a sob, catching it before it became a full-blown wail. Carter was dead. Funny, quirky Carter. I cupped my hands across his eyes and gently closed them, and then sat back on my heels, feeling a lump the size of a fist close my throat. What in the world had just happened? Carter wasn't an uncle by birth. He was my older brother's best friend. The 2 intellectuals had been inseparable as boys, spending most of their time researching obscure pieces of history or arguing over the many discrepancies found in their high school history books. I was 2 years younger than my brother Ben and would often inject myself into their play when we were young. As a result, we spent hours competing at board games, playing hide and seek, or building forts in our Wisconsin backyard. Ben excelled at the board games, especially if they took any sort of intellectual strategy. I excelled at hide and seek because I was small and crafty. And Carter was best at hold the fort because he was big and brawny for his age. My brain sometimes works like a pressure valve, releasing information little bits at a time. It did that then, forcing me to sit there in shock. In fact, it was a few agonizing seconds before I remembered what Carter had said just before he died. Someone had killed him. Oh my God, a voice exclaimed from behind me. I turned to find April coming through the breakfast room that overlooked our deck and the lake beyond. She wore a flower-covered apron pulled tight around her waist, accentuating her rounded hips. She must have used a finger to brush something off her face because she had a streak of flour splashed across her smooth espresso skin, looking like a chalk mark on a blackboard. Is that Carter? She asked, hurrying forward. Yes, I mumbled. I grabbed a tissue from the pocket of the denim vest that I'd thrown over my t-shirt that morning and used it to dab my eyes. April leaned over Carter's body. What's wrong with him? Well, he's dead. Oh, Julia, I'm so sorry. What happened? I don't know. I just opened the door and he stepped inside and collapsed. But he said the weirdest thing before he fell to the floor. He said that someone had killed him. Her brows creased. I wonder what that means. She looked down at Carter. Have you called anyone? My brain finally re-engaged. Oh, no, of course. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. I reported the incident and then put in a call to David, my boyfriend, who was also a local police detective. I hung up and April asked, did he say anything else before he died, like why he was here? No, I said with a sniffle. By the time I said hello, he was on the way to the floor. It all happened so fast. April stood up and put a hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry, Julia. I know the two of you were close. Yes, I said, lifting myself off the floor. The last time I saw him was at one of those Thanksgiving dinners he holds. You know, I told you about those. Everyone on the guest list came early to take part in preparing the meal. He stopped doing them because he said he just wasn't feeling up to it anymore. Tears suddenly flooded my eyes. Come and sit down, she said, leading me over toward the reception desk. We were in the inn's entryway, just in front of our large mahogany reception desk. April pulled the rolling chair out from our small office and brought it over for me. Will you be okay? She asked. Yes. Well, no, I said, sniffling. He was quirky, you know. Most people thought Carter had an off-beat sense of humor, and he was persnickety about his immense collection of old books because he didn't like anybody touching them. My eyes rested on his body, thinking how old he looked. Do you know that at one time he measured over 6 feet tall? God, I'd love to see those hunched shoulders and that crooked smile just one more time. It will devastate Ben, don't you think? April asked. Where is he these days? He's in London. He's still researching the Lusk letter. You mean the one they think the real Jack the Ripper sent to the police? Yes. I'll text Ben. He rarely answers if I call, but he's also not very good at returning texts. Minnie's sharp bark brought our attention toward the stairs. Kurt, the 12-year-old son of one of our guests, stood halfway down the wide staircase that led to the upstairs guest bedrooms. His mouth hung open as he stared at Carter's body. Kurt was a nasty little thing who had already terrorized my dogs by chasing them around the breakfast room, threatening them with a stick. They hadn't forgotten that and were barking and snarling at him from the bottom of the stairs as if they'd like to rip his ankles to shreds. He ignored them, continuing to stare at Carter. "Is that guy dead?" he asked, his eyes round with shock. There was no way to sugarcoat it. "Yes, I think you should go back to your room." I let the dogs continue to bark, hoping it would annoy him. He was unfazed. After all, miniature dachshunds are, well, miniature. Little did he know how sharp their teeth were. "No way," he said, descending the stairs. "I've never seen a dead body." April quickly circled the reception desk, pushing the dogs aside and blocking him from stepping off the landing. "I think it would be best if you went back to your room," she said sternly. "Yeah, but that guy is toast," he replied, straining to see around April's shoulders. "Go back to your room now," I snapped, standing up. I'm only 5'3", so my stature wouldn't intimidate anyone, but Kurt seemed to recognize an order when he heard one and slumped up the stairs. "Fine, but my dad will want to know what happened." The sound of another door in the guest hallway upstairs showed we needed to do crowd control. "I'll take care of it," April said. She hustled up the stairs to stop people from coming down. Mercer Island sits in the middle of Lake Washington and is connected to Seattle and Bellevue by Interstate 90. It isn't a large community, and the police station is only a few minutes away. That's why it didn't surprise me when the distant sound of sirens reached my ears so quickly. I stood up and took a last fond look at Carter before the police took over. "I'm so sorry, Carter. I'll miss you, even though you did relegate me to forever setting the table at your Thanksgiving dinners. I won't hold it against you." In Carter's defense, I did almost kill his cat. In my defense, it wasn't all my fault. Truth be told, his niece had played a role in that one. She bumped into me as I was turning from the kitchen counter one year, making me step back onto the cat's tail. The feline shrieked, I jumped, and then dropped the gravy bowl on its head, sending it to the emergency vet. In the end, the cat was fine, but the following year, Carter prohibited me from going near the kitchen. My job going forward, he said, would be to fold napkins and set out the tableware. I smiled at the memory because as I dutifully folded napkins the following year, I knocked over a candle on the dining room table and set fire to the tablecloth. That forced Carter's sprinkler system to go off, sending his guests running for their lives. I let out a heavy sigh, knowing there would be no more Thanksgiving dinners for us, either at his house or mine. As the sirens grew closer, I glanced out the door to our small parking lot. The police cruiser was just pulling down the drive, so I quickly rounded up the dogs and got them into my apartment. When I returned, an ambulance had also arrived. I was careful to step around Carter and out onto the front porch as a uniformed police officer climbed out of his patrol car. He hurried up the steps with a female officer right behind him. I gestured through the open door to the body on the floor. "It's my uncle," or, well, not my uncle. He was a family friend, I said. "Stay here, ma'am," the first officer said and hurried inside. The EMTs threw open the rear doors of the ambulance and followed with a stretcher, brushing past me. I wandered over to the front porch railing and watched through the open door as they gathered around the body, checking for signs of life. A moment later, April joined me just as a black SUV arrived. It was David. "Do you think he ever asks himself what he got himself into when he met me?" I asked, watching David climb out of the car. April laughed. "I'm sure he asks himself that all the time, but he adores you." David and I had met when a close friend had died the year before while eating my peach cobbler. Well, that wasn't exactly what happened. She'd been poisoned with arsenic from my pantry. It wasn't my arsenic, and I hadn't poisoned her. Someone else had done that, but she died at my dining room table. Anyway, David was a detective with the Mercer Island PD, and shortly after we solved the case, he and I began to date. We hadn't seen each other since we returned from Chicago, where a foul ball had hit me in the head at Wrigley Field. That had landed me in the hospital for 48 hours while they ruled out a concussion. Given a clean bill of health, we flew home, and he'd become engulfed in a string of burglaries on the island. He climbed the steps, nodded to April, and gazed down at me. I must have looked like a lost puppy because he wrapped his arms around me and pulled me into a hug. "You okay?" he said in my ear. "Yes," I replied with a sob. He squeezed me tight and then released me. "So what happened this time?" The question might seem unusual, even callous, but lately, every time I turned around, someone in my vicinity was dying under unusual circumstances. "My uncle." "Sorry, he's not my real uncle," I said. "He's a close friend of the family." "You said something on the phone about someone killing him." That's what he told me. I heard the bell and came to answer the door. When I opened it, he just sort of stepped forward and collapsed, and he's dead. Yes, I said, a tear slipping down my cheek. All right, wait here, he said, wiping the tear away. He disappeared inside. The St. Clair Inn measures almost 6,500 square feet with 2 floors and a large attic. It was the perfect example of a classic Victorian building complete with resident ghosts. April and I stood on the wraparound porch and moved over to a bench. She produced a tissue from her pocket and handed it to me since I'd already shredded mine. What do you think Ben will say? She asked. I don't know, I said, drying my face. He and Carter were in close contact. I think Carter was even helping him do research. Maybe Ben will know if Carter was ill. Carter said nothing about that when you talked to him recently? No. I mean, he told me he was stopping the dinners because he said they were just too much work, but I think he was healthy. I just wonder why he showed up here unannounced. Perhaps he wanted to tell you he was ill. I don't know. It's weird. I opened the door. He reached out and grabbed me around the waist and slid to the floor. And he said someone had killed him? Yes, and to tell Ben. Why do people keep dying around me? No idea, she said. Wait a minute, I grasped her hand. That's not all he said. He said Ben should look for something. But then he kind of gasped or gurgled, and I couldn't understand the last word. Try to remember, she encouraged me, her eyes searching mine. Sound it out. I paused, thinking back to that moment, and then tried to imitate his sound. He said, tell Ben to look for the asked. I did it several times, attempting to form the right sounds. A few times, I swear, it sounded like I was about to choke, until April suddenly grabbed my arm, stopping me mid-gurgle. Julia, I think I know what he was trying to say. He wanted Ben to look for the casket. Didn't see that one coming. That's the first chapter of The Key to Murder. And you should know this book, my murder, I do kill a lot of people. When Kaz and Margaret were talking about that. When I wrote the first book in this series, in Keeping with Murder, I knew I was pushing the envelope when it comes to cozy mysteries because it had to do with sex trafficking. I've dealt with child abuse, and this is Jack the Ripper and a very murderous secret society called the Electi. So they're humorous, they're casual in the writing, but the mysteries, the murders are very serious. In fact, the first 4 books, I even put something at the back of the book talking about the social content, about child abuse. One was about I mentioned sex trafficking, even black market adoption, and where people could go if that was a cause that I spent my whole life in the nonprofit world, so where they could go if they wanted to work in those areas and help to stop sex trafficking. And these women are all in their 60s, where Margaret said hers are in her mid 40s. These are all in their middle to late 60s. And they talk about sex, they talk about obviously murder. They're very irreverent. And I get fans who thank me for writing about older women who aren't dead yet. So Margaret, I bet you kind of relate to that too.
I totally do. I mean, my character, and this is a nine book series and she ages as you go along. She's not staying 23 years old for the rest of her life. She's 45 and is pushes past 50 and through the series. And she's just a lot of fun and ageless in a way, because I mean, I'm 62, and once you get a certain age, you realize that you're still you. The body looks different, but you're still you in there. And I think that that's a message that older women want to know. I mean, I don't write anybody who's not, the youngest protagonist that I have, because I have another series, she's 37. And I don't think you have any clue about anything before then, So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get on a soapbox, but I totally get it. I get a lot of women really happy to find somebody they can actually relate to instead of a 23-year-old size 2 that knows everything.
Exactly.
When I
Exactly.
punch them in the face.
Well, and I get comments that people love the fact that these women are in their 60s, but they're fearless. And
Yes.
so I'm
Yes.
72. And,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, we're not
Well,
dead
yeah.
yet. We have a
Right.
lot of reading to do.
And Glad was like, I mean, like, I don't know, 70 something. And so
She's
I
a
mean,
character.
usually my heroine is like the youngest one around, and because there's so much older woman wisdom, and that they play off each other, and I get to show older women's wisdom and humor and everything with a slightly younger protagonist, so that there's a little bit of a age, you want to attract a larger audience, so anyway.
I want to hurry on because, we need
Sorry,
to
yes, sorry. Mhm.
But no. But I wanted to say that my heroine, Rosie, is only in her early 30s, but I have a group of 4 older women who are actually octogenarian, nonagerians,
Yes.
who steal the books all of the time, steal the stories all of the time.
Yes,
they
exactly.
are outrageous, absolutely outrageous. They're not afraid to say anything. They say exactly what they think. They're hilariously funny, and you're dead right. And yet, when the time calls for it, they have that wisdom and they have that understanding, But it is about these women, at 90 still wearing Spanx and stripping down, the strip off because at the end of the I won't tell you why, but
we get it. I mean, you're not dead yet until you're in the grave.
I just put all my contact information for the book and my newsletter and my website in the chat room.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. And now we have another author. Yay, still more to come. So Philippa, I am going to ask you to unmute yourself. I'm going to put you on spotlight, and hopefully I will say your name correctly as I introduce you. Now let's just make sure that you are unmuted before I start. If you move your mouse over to the bottom of your screen, there you go. Well done. So Philippa Nefri Clark lives just outside a small town in regional Victoria, Australia, with a few acres, some vegetable gardens, a Labrador, and lots of wildlife. She writes full-time with a love of mysteries and always a happy ending. Welcome, Philippa.
Thank you. Hi there.
Hello.
I was going to read from my first cozy mystery, but then I remembered I've got a new story coming out in a multi-author anthology, and it's actually going to be the prequel of this series. And nobody has seen it yet other than the editorial people with the anthology. So I thought I'd read some of that because it kind of sets the series up a little bit. Just to introduce myself a little bit more, I write Australian mysteries, and I crossed the genres a little bit. I started with mystery romances, and then moved to sort of more small town traditional mysteries. And then I've moved to cozies last year because I wanted to write something a bit lighter. I wanted to write stuff that didn't have all the stuff that in the world has been a bit miserable lately. And I had the perfect character because Daphne Jones appeared in my very first book, the first mystery romance. And she was a comic relief character, and she didn't go away. She just hung around. So she was in 4 books in that series, and then a cameo in the second series, and now she's got her own series. She's ex-real estate. She and her husband, John, had a real estate agency in Rivers End, which is where this excerpt is set. And then they went on to travel around the state of Victoria, where she's now a wedding celebrant, an officiant. I guess Americans would understand that more than celebrant. But she goes to celebrate births, deaths, anything life-based. And they actually travel in a caravan or a camper week by week. So no small town, lots of small towns, but none that they stay in. So I'm just checking, making sure I've got everything else there that I don't want to forget because I'm nervous. Yeah, so just to set this up a fraction, this one's called Daff at the Beach. It's the Daphne Jones Mysteries, and she has 3 books out so far. This is her, whoops, that was her first book, which is back to front. But she, all of her books have Daff in place of death, so it's just a little bit of a fun thing. So she's getting ready to do a wedding in Riversend on the beach, and she finds a body. And the body may have fallen off a cliff. So a little bit later in the story, she's with one of her friends. She's also they're both in their 60s. So I love that age too. So hopefully you enjoy. I do think we should have waited for Martin to call, or at least got Angus to come with us. Elizabeth was a bit behind Daphne as they traipsed through the graveyard. Or we could tell Trev what we're doing. Negatory, not yet. I was interrupted when I was here earlier, and I have an important job for you. They reached the bushes, and this time Daphne took her time gazing at the ground. What are we looking for? Poor Elizabeth had no idea what was going on in Daphne's mind, and she wasn't sure that she knew yet either. A theory was forming, and she had to go with the flow. What do you make of those tracks in the dirt? She pointed at a bare patch just before the bushes. Are they like a bicycle wheel? Elizabeth peered at them. Very similar, but there are 2 tracks. Did someone wheel a bike to the bushes and then back again? Or were there 2 bikes? 2 bikes? 2 offenders? Oh, this was getting worse by the minute. Let's take some photos in case it rains or something happens and they disappear before Trev can take a look. Trev's the local police officer. I'll do that, Daff. At least I'm making myself useful. I knew you were a sleuth at heart, Daphne thought. You're doing great. There was the faintest impression in the grass where it met the dirt, and Daphne tried to follow it until it disappeared in the longer grass. The general direction was the car park. From where she stood, the tracks got clearer the closer they got to the bushes, and something was odd about those. I think I've got plenty of evidence, Elizabeth called as she put her phone away. What are you staring at? Do you think those 2 bushes have some broken branches? Daphne pointed and walked back. I wonder if the bikes or their riders forced their way through. Both women stopped short of the bushes, leaning down to better see. Elizabeth took a few more photographs with a bit of a grin. I'm seeing the same tracks, but isn't this odd? Unless I'm wrong, they're the same distance apart. With a deep sigh at the idea of having to stand on the edge of the cliff, Daphne said, I'm going to take a look on the other side, but not here because I don't want to disturb these. Oh, that doesn't sound safe. Elizabeth followed Daphne to where she'd slipped through earlier this afternoon. I think you should wait for some help. You're all the help I need. Okay, well, shall I hold on to you? Daphne smiled nervously. I'm fine to squeeze through. There's a solid ledge, but you keep a lookout. Elizabeth grabbed Daphne's arm. Lookout? Yes, dear, in case Thomas comes back. He doesn't think I should be on the other side of these, and I agree with him. Nevertheless, we need to clear Christie's good name, and if it means popping out there for a minute, then I will. Daphne gazed at Elizabeth, her conscience tugging at her at the concern in her friend's eyes. I promise I'll be safe. Promise. Elizabeth's mouth formed a straight line as she glanced back the way they'd come. And she nodded and took Daphne's hand. Fine, but you hold on to me, please. Daphne squeezed between 2 bushes and stopped when her arm was fully extended to Elizabeth, her eyes desperate for clues. And there they were. 2 lines, indents in the sandy ledge. narrow tire tracks, and something else, a footprint. Elizabeth, dear, I need to take some photos, so you will have to release my hand. But she might fall. I won't, really. There's about 2 feet to the edge, and I won't move at all. 2 feet? 2 full feet? Are you quite mad, Daphne Jones? What on earth will I tell John? Oh, she had 2 feet of safety. Oh, but she fell. It was a long way down. Laughter bubbled up. Daphne couldn't help herself. Her legs were shaking because she was terrible with heights, and it was only the compulsion to save Christy which forced her to pretend the giant drop to the ocean was only a mirage. If she laughed, she might push the terror away. I'm going to take some photos and we'll be back with you in under 30 seconds. Elizabeth let go. Daphne snapped as many images as she could before her heart almost gave out, and then she threw herself back between the bushes, straight into Elizabeth's waiting arms. Oh, thank goodness, we're getting too old for these, Elizabeth seemed at a loss for the right word. Shenanigans? Now that was a fine word. Never too old to save a friend. Well, that part is true. So now what? Are we taking these photos to show Trev? Arm in arm, Elizabeth and Daphne wound their way to the car park. He might know something about 2 people on bicycles. Or they might be from perfectly innocent sightseers, Daphne said as she turned her attention to the car park. What if you go one way and I'll go the other? We should get Martha to help. Oh, not sure Thomas would approve, but why? Daphne scanned the ground as she slowly walked. Elizabeth giggled. She used to get up to all sorts of shenanigans. When we first met, she was on a boat off the Norwegian coast following the Northern Lights. And after that, she illegally climbed a pyramid one night in Egypt. Oh, was that when she fell and injured her ankle? Daphne asked. It was. This would be right up her alley. Oh my goodness. Elizabeth had stopped and pulled out her phone as Daphne hurried to her. The narrow tire tracks were back, leading to a parking spot, and another footprint, deep and large, like the one on the ridge. Daphne took her own photographs, her heart racing as she snapped away. This might be a real clue, one which Trev could use to find the real killer and release Christy. And it had to happen soon with the wedding just around the corner.
Very well done.
Oh, thank you. So no, it's a lot of fun. It's about 20,000 words, that story, but it bridges the gap between the first series in River's End, and so there's some characters that appear there that are later referred to. So it just sort of helps tie it all together.
Yeah. Nice.
Thank you.
That was very fun.
I like having older sleuths, and I've got younger characters in other books, but I've had so many people write to me and say, having someone in their 60s who's, a little bit overweight, and she's chasing someone, which she occasionally chases the bad guy, and her buttons feel like they're going to pop off, and people feel like they can understand her, and they love the fact that she uses her big heart, but her sharp brain. She loves puzzles, so she's a lot of fun to write.
Nice. Oh, thanks for sharing with us. So this is a good starter story, regardless if you haven't read anything, because it'll kind of link to different series that actually have a lot of the same people in them.
It does. So it starts off Daphne and John's change from being someone almost retired to actually making the decision to retire and travel, so that Daphne's later in life career as a wedding officiant can take off. So it sets it all up beautifully, and then you just ease into the books that are already out, and there are 3 of those already published.
Nice. Wonderful. Well, listen, I'm going to take you off spotlight while you post in the chat your links. And then I'm going to get us all back on gallery view again. So this is the part where everybody can, and it's a small group today, so people can just unmute themselves, raise your hand with a question, or just unmute yourself. So I'm going to start with my friend Charlotte, who has a question. So feel free to unmute yourself when you can there. Hello.
Thank you, Kitty, and hello, ladies. I wanted to ask Lynn, just check you can hear me properly. I actually, in terms of the books that I would normally choose to read, normally choose nonfiction. I have a real interest and fascination in the mind behind the people that commit the serious crimes. And I'm just wondering, since you're writing about serious crimes, why you brought in the ghost element. I was just curious about that.
That's interesting. I think it's because I just have always been fascinated by ghosts. And the very first book I wrote is called Grave Doubts. So it's a standalone female protagonist. And in that, there's not necessarily a ghost, but it's paranormal in that there's a black onyx bird that her best friend who is murdered is given to her, and it almost embodies her friend who died. It literally moves around on its own, and I had so much fun writing that. I mean, it's kind of creepy in places and eerie because the bird seems to it seems to almost be embodied with a personality, and the fact that it can move around on its own, and it even sets up some very scary situations with her. That then and there's a dog in everyone. I have dogs in all my books. So in that one, it's a German Shepherd who comes to the rescue at the end. My detective series, it's a Basset Hound, and in these sets of books, it's the miniature dachshunds. So I'm one of those writers that tends to integrate things that I really enjoy and that make me happy. And so paranormal stuff has always intrigued me. And I think that's why, and even though I like scary paranormal stuff, I chose not to do that. I'm on the cusp of writing a horror book because I would like to do that. I would like to have the experience of doing that. But these are all, some of the situations are eerie with the paranormal, but the paranormal is helpful. Does that make sense? Okay. So I don't know if that answered your question. I mean, it was something that, and I just started watching a Netflix series on Tyler Henry. I don't know if you guys have ever, he's a medium that has like 300,000 people on a waiting list. That kind of thing fascinates me. The talking to the other side and the whole concept of where do we go after we die. And so I kind of weave a lot of that into my books. In fact, in the Old Maids of Mercer Island books, Julia Applegate is the protagonist, and her dead mother starts calling her on her cell phone, which is, in my writers group that I work my books through, I thought they would just lambast me for that. Like, oh my God, nobody's going to ever accept that. People love it. The whole idea that her mother calls her on her cell phone. So I don't know.
No, it was just interesting for me because the serious crimes are so horrible in themselves. And so I was just wondering, was the ghost element to lighten it actually? So that's why I was just asking. But it's very interesting to me.
Well, and it is true because a lot of cozy mysteries are typically what I consider more vanilla murders. I mean, that's kind of what they're built around, and then no sex, no graphic violence. And that's why I said I knew I was kind of pushing the envelope with my murders. But and again, in my writers group, when I get too close to the real deal, I'll have to pull back because I know that I'm in a cozy mystery genre, even though I'm at the edge of it. You know what I mean? So I'm a little bit different.
Thanks. And I think it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've heard that called cozy adjacent, Lynn. And that's what I call myself, cozy adjacent, because I don't really meet all the cozy rules.
Mhm.
And especially the idea of there's not even a murder in a lot of my books, like in Glad One, the old woman that she's talking to at the beach, she comes to see her one day and she's dead in her chair and nobody knows who she is. And so
Oh,
that's
interesting.
history. And so, and you know, I don't have a dead body on hardly any of my books other than not a murder, but I heard that term cozy adjacent. And I don't look a lot like a cozy book. My books don't look that cozy, but they don't have sex and they don't have swear words, especially no F-bombs or whatever. And I think that makes us marketable to the cozy market.
Yeah.
But I consider myself just a mystery writer, and I'm cozy adjacent, you know?
And you know, my old maids, they say shit and damn. And I will,
Yeah.
every once in a while, I'll get a reader who's obviously a cozy mystery reader who will say, I was surprised by the bad language. They
Yeah.
never say the F word or anything else. But they love it anyway. They accept it.
Yes.
It's sort of like I've come
But
up
they'll
to the
scold
line.
you, but they
I've
have
come
to
up to the
scold
line,
you
but I haven't
first.
crossed the
Yes.
line. Yeah.
Yeah. I get, you know, when my friend, sometimes my characters will say, oh my God. And I've gotten a couple of times, God should always be capitalized. I'm like,
Oh,
okay, thank you, church lady. No, but you know, you're going to offend somebody with something. So,
I
so,
had a
but-
reviewer say just
Mhm.
recently that, and I would have said there was absolutely no swearing at all of any type in my books, but I had a reviewer or a fan, I can't remember, say she really loved the story, but it was a shame that I had to swear in it. And I had to kind of think to myself, so this must be an American thing. There must be something that I've said that Americans are going to find as a swear word that Australians might not, because, and yet, you know, my books are edited by American editors.
I would say it was either that or she confused you with another book. I just got a 1-star review on a book and it's like, why are you writing about cats and getting laid? I'm like, there's no cats or getting laid in my book. So you might have missed the point there.
No,
but it happens.
She was talking about my book because, you know, she wanted to mention it.
Okay.
But you know, there was just this thing, and I'm still shaking my head over it because I don't know. But what you were saying about the dark elements and that adjacent cozy, I really sort of like that term, because as I was listening to you, I was thinking that I got pulled up on my last book, I think it was, by the editorial team, who actually had a meeting over it and thought that I had actually made the story too dark. And, you know, they really sort of said, you know, we really need to pull it back, you know, like stay in your lane sort of thing. You know, this isn't cozies aren't dark. We don't want it dark. So I'm really interested in that adjacent cozy term.
Yeah. I mean, my stuff is escapist. There's not, you're not going to see anything real dark in there. It's more like if there's a crime, it's like a cozy a comedy crime caper type crime. Just because my books are meant to be a fun escape and nothing more. I'm not trying to do anything more. I mean, but you know,
it's just so interesting though that we have to, you know, because we're writing for a fan base, and so you have to keep that in mind. My third book is set up on Camino Island, up here in the Seattle area, and in an old scary mansion, and it's very much like Psycho in that it talks about the guy who used to own it, and it turns out he's dead, sitting in a wheelchair, mummified, and so clearly, and this one has to do with mental health, that his daughter, who has been basically taking care of him, is nuts. And I used to work in the mental health area, and so I try to handle that with, in fact, one of my characters, when Julia is being flippant about, you know, the fact that she's a fruitcake, her best friend Blair gets very quiet and says, you know, my brother was schizophrenic and killed himself. And and
Yeah.
it brings Julia back to, you know, I'm sorry, you're right. And so I try to, you know, I've had readers also thank me for dealing with social issues that I don't think cozy mysteries usually deal with either. But
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
and I
you know,
remember I did
yeah.
my writers group. I said to my writers group, I'm getting too dark in that book. And one of my writer friends said, hey, you should be writing what you want. Why do you care? And I said, because there are readers that will pull away from that. If it gets too dark, they're gonna stop reading.
Yeah.
There are definite expectations, definite reader expectations in every genre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first several books that I published, I was like, okay, I know what I want to do. I want to write about like people like me, people like the friends that I hang around with a lot. So I go to church every Sunday. You know, I talk to God all the time. My husband's always like, oh,
with a capital G. With
yeah,
a capital
G.
G.
Capital G, God. Yeah. I also say shit, damn, and hell. And the more that I'm around people who say the F-bomb, I know I'm so naughty because if I get really angry.
No judgment here.
So I was like, you know, I just want to write. Also, you know, I just really have always had a thing for wanting to write stories that are about real people with real problems, as well as being an escape. And so
Totally.
in my stories, I wanted, if I had newlyweds, I wanted them to really enjoy having sex, because I will always be the person who is like, thank you, God, for making such a wonderful thing, you know? And I want people to feel like this is a good thing and a wonderful thing. And, but when I was putting out the first couple of books, and I had people like me who were talking to God and going to church and sometimes saying shit, damn, and hell and having sex with their husband, and they were always married. Boy, I got reviews going crazy across the board. And the marketing, it was just, you can't market that very well. And so that's the reason why I finally this year I'm rebranding everything, just so that I can hit a market.
It blows my mind that it's okay to murder people, but you can't have sex and you can't say cuss words. And that's just like, that, you know, I deal with a lot of irony, and like in this book, Glad One, you know, we find out that Glad's friends were mostly just a bunch of homeless people. And so I deal with homeless issues, but you deal with it in to me, I take the pain and turn it into humor in a way, because I've had a really hard life. And so I have a lot of this whole, and I've always dealt with stuff with trying to see the treasure in the pain. And so I broadcast a lot of that in my series too. So I think there's different ways to deal with stuff. So
I totally was so with your character when she said she came back to her home country and felt like the stranger. I'm like, oh, that's happened to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I actually did live in Germany for 7 years, learned the language, came back here, and I was erased as a human being in the States, because everything goes on a 7-year cycle. I'm like, great. I couldn't get a driver's license because I didn't have an address, and I couldn't get a lease because I didn't have a driver's license.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was such a great time in my life. But it was great novel fodder.
Do we have other questions, Kitty? Do we have anybody who's got other questions?
Do you have any more, Charlotte?
No, I don't have more questions. I'm just learning a lot. So I'm like really grateful to all four authors, because as I say, I normally read nonfiction. I mean, I'm always hunting the nonfiction stories I really want to hear. And it's because I have a real desire to understand the real people, the real thing. And I think, and wrongly, and you teaching me something, I kind of dismiss it. If it's fiction, and it's all just hairy-fairy and it's not realistic. I mean, and so I apologize to all of you. And I'm actually intrigued to try a few other books. So thank you. It's really interesting that, yeah, maybe it's fiction, but it's still addressing real things. And I think that's really interesing for me to realize.
Well, you know, I think with cozies too, so much of the time it's the characters, the protagonists get involved for a reason. You know, they're all amateur sleuths. That's cozy mysteries. but there's a reason, their best friend is killed and they're not going to sit back if nothing's happening. Or they believe, maybe in one of my books it's deemed a suicide and the protagonist is positive she didn't kill herself, and she's going to be the only one that can bring light to it. So it's interesting, I think, in cozies to see what drives the protagonist forward into researching or investigating a mystery, because I'm assuming none of us do that in our real lives. I have never, done that, and not only not killed somebody, but investigated a murder.
I'm glad
But I'd like to
I'm
think
pleading the fifth on all of this.
I'd like to think that I would, I'd like to think that I would, if there was a reason where I was suspicious that something wrong was done to somebody that I cared about, that I don't know if you guys heard about those women that, I think it was 3 or 4 women that they research cold cases online, and they're like doing it as a thing now.
Yeah.
So, I'd like to be one of those women.
Yes, yeah. I always feel that it's really important to give people who can't speak a way to express themselves. And I tend to do that. I try and right wrongs through my stories, not real wrongs, but I want people to feel that they can actually stand up for themselves perhaps a little bit more. Sometimes they need to find ways to get a bit more support and help. But I also write crime suspense, and in those books, it's not as much about finding who did the bad deed, but the people that are peripheral to it, finding their voice and stepping up. And my women, and all but one of my books have a female protagonist, they generally start off a bit quieter and a bit softer, and then you see them grow and go, you know what, I might be quiet about it, but I'm putting my foot down, and that's sort of my little thing, that how I see the world, because there's too many people that don't have a voice or don't know how to use their voice.
Yeah. Well, I thank you all for being here today. We'll be putting this up on YouTube so that people can come back to it. Everybody who wasn't able to be here with us live, I'll try to make sure I get all of your links put in the notes on YouTube as well. And I'll send you all the link to the YouTube video. So I'm just going to say thank you very much and stop the recording, and then we'll say our goodbyes.
And thank you to you, Kitty. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
It's fun.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kitty. We've had such a lovely morning. Thank you.